nature and the outdoors, and really just fell in love with God at college. And so I'm really involved in the youth at my church, Antioch Community Church. And then I host a podcast called Created Curious. I've been doing podcasts for about 3 years now. And one in particular that I did about a year ago, and I'm actually writing a paper now, and I just interviewed Justin as part of it, was over one of my good friends, Sam DeRouse. He's actually registered with Disability Services. And, you know, the more that I get to know my peers in Disability Services, I see the kind of the accessibility needs that need to be addressed, but also the giftings that are going unseen. And so those two things right there are big things that I am really focused on. And, you know, being a believer in Jesus, I think that everybody has a unique, special story, and to give people the ability to tell that story, I think is really important. And then showcasing what truly is special about that story. And I think there's, you know, overall in the disability community, not only, you know, what we're here to discuss today, but there's a lot of untapped potential for that could enrich society in general. And so those are a couple of things, you know, that I'm very passionate about. Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Bailey. Maureen, why don't you go next?
Hi, I'm Maureen Hayden. I'm a third-year graduate student in the Marine Biology Interdisciplinary Program, working on my dissertation studying plastic pollution at Texas A&M University. So I usually get to go to the beach for work, however, not at this present moment. Definitely missing my ocean views. Some things I am involved with at Texas A&M include I play trombone in the Texas A&M Symphonic Band. I'm also president of a student organization called Insightful Connections, where we promote awareness, education, and advocacy for our blindness, low vision community here on campus and in our surrounding community. And then I also serve on the disability subcommission.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I'm jealous of that beach environment. Hopefully you can get back out there soon enough. Peyton, why don't you jump in next?
Yeah, so howdy, my name is Peyton. I am a freshman at Texas A&M. I absolutely love it. I am studying agricultural leadership and development with 2 minors in communication and Spanish. Absolutely love it. And I am originally from Georgetown, Texas, and have been involved in quite a few things at A&M, which include raise guide dogs for the blind with guide dogs out of San Francisco, California. And then I also am part of a Christian organization called Phi Lam, Sigma Phi Lambda, and it's all about bridging the gap between bridging the gap of Christians on campus to the rest of the world. And then in addition to that, I also do a lot of mission work, and then I create model United Nations clubs for high school, middle school, and elementary students as well. And so I'm happy to be part of this panel and to also learn a little bit more about the disability services from my fellow peers.
And you've always been an awesome contributor to our panels, and I'm really looking forward to chatting with you a bit more today. Thank you so much for joining us. Rebecca, why don't you jump in?
Howdy, I'm Rebecca Baumgarten. That's my screen reader. You'll probably hear him chattering periodically. Just ignore him. I'm a first-year master's student in the English department. I also did my undergrad here. Shut up. And I'm focusing on the Inklings, so Tolkien and Lewis. And I'm also working on making a screen reader to read Old English for, purely self-centered motives. I guess my dream job is to be an Inkling scholar and fantasy novelist on the side. I'm very involved with St. Mary's Catholic Center. I'm an officer on the apologetics team, and I sing the choir there. That's what I got.
Awesome. And as a fellow screen reader user, somebody who is totally blind, the Zoom chitter chatter of JAWS is faintly noticeable. It is not even a big deal. Don't even worry about that throughout
Okay, good.
the time. I always worry about that myself, but like being on the other side of it, don't even worry about it. It is so faint. It's not even a problem. And Victoria, why don't you jump in?
Hi, I'm Victoria Mancuso, and I'm a senior communication major with a minor in business. I am from Houston, Texas, and I recently just accepted a job, and I'm moving to Dallas. As of right now, I'm supposed to be starting in May, so I'm super excited about that, and just I guess graduating is exciting but scary. My dream job, I think, would be to write a book with my mom. That is my dream job now, but we'll see. But yeah, I'm really excited to get to talk to everyone today and answer some questions and get to know more.
Awesome. This is your panel. They are the experts. They're living, breathing, doing each and every day. And this transition has been full of challenges and opportunities for them like it is for you. And so let's go ahead and open the conversation. And panelists, I'll call on somebody to start. But I want to know, what are some barriers that you experience in your environment? You know, in your own words, describe your disability and kind of briefly talk through those barriers that you experience in the classroom. And Peyton, if you wouldn't mind starting, and then others can kind of jump in as Peyton wraps up.
Yeah, no, not at all. So for those who don't know, I am dyslexic, and there's different types of dyslexia, but personally, I do three of the three things that happens when I tend to read or write. One is I jump over words, and so I don't necessarily know that either words are there, or I fill in my own words based on what my comprehension level is and when I'm reading. And then second kind of thing that happens is my spelling. I've given up a little bit. We love technology today. We love spell check. That's an amazing good thing to have these days. But and then also finally, it just takes me a little bit longer to read and to navigate the complexities of what's going on in our world. But some of the barriers that I tend to face is like one that I said, it takes a little bit more time. So for tests, quizzes, assignments, it just takes me a little bit longer. It takes me a couple proofreads, sometime having to send it out to some friends or family to have it read over, just to make sure that it all works together and makes sense outside of what my brain thinks is making sense. And then secondly, I mainly do all of my work on the computer for all tests, quizzes, and things like that, all assignments, for the reason that spell check and things like that. And so that can sometimes be a barrier when in the classroom and doing small quizzes or things like that when you are in class. And then another one final barrier, I guess, would say is that sometimes I feel that there, and especially with online classes, I know we'll discuss this a little bit later, Justin, specifically for online classes, but having to paying attention and keeping that focus, because a lot of professors use slides and things like that, and reading slides for a very long period of time it gets mentally exhausting for me. And so I know that it takes me extra time to kind of revamp and get my brain re-energized to be able to really focus and really gather the material so that I can create my own understanding.
And if our other panelists want to jump in and add some feedback there about their personal description of disability and barriers.
Maureen, I'll go next.
Yeah, Maureen, perfect.
So for me, I am legally blind and have been since birth, so I don't see out of my right eye at all. And then my left eye, I have poor vision that is not correctable with any kind of lens or glasses. I can read large print, but if I were to read newspaper print, like I would basically have to like hold the paper up to my nose as if I was holding a scratch and sniff sticker. So that's what that would look like. So primarily barriers for me are accessing literature. And then the other big one is I do not drive. Using public transportation to get to campus. Rideshare has drastically changed the way I navigate and get around town. But I use a lot of like screen magnification and accessibility tools on my iPhone. And then I also have permission to use my laptop to take exams and to take notes in class, and then additional time for testing, whether it be navigating the screen with a screen magnifier or primarily for me, when I learn material, it's auditorily versus visually. And sometimes that means listening to content 3 or 4 times over to truly absorb the material, to make sure you understand what's going on.
Panelists, feel free to say your name and jump in there if you're interested in answering the question.
Rebecca?
Yeah, Rebecca, go ahead.
So I'm also legally blind, but I think I'm more legally blind because I, like Maureen, don't really see much out of my right eye. I usually use my left eye. I have Swiss cheese vision, and all of the holes of the Swiss cheese have the diameter of a coffee stirrer. My eyes also physically wiggle, and I have problems with color and, oh gosh, like night blindness and lighting problems. But the primary problem is the really small tunnel vision. So I guess to give some perspective, when I'm texting somebody and there's the 3 little dots that show that the other person is typing, I can't see all 3 dots at once. So while I have good enough acuity to read print, my tunnel vision is too small for that. So I use a computer with the screen reader that I've mentioned, and a handheld device that reads all of my books in a little robot voice. I use a lot of robots, and refreshable braille display. Also my phone with its own screen reader. Like I said, a lot of little robot voices read me everything. And I use braille as a fallback. And I also use inverted colors. I on my computer screen, because I can read a little bit, sometimes I do look at the screen, I have yellow on black. And so like Maureen, I face a lot of problems with getting around on this very large campus with ancient cracked sidewalks, although that's not really a problem right now because I'm at home. And gosh, yeah, take notes on my computer, ask professors to call my name when I raise my hand because I can't see when they're looking at me. Things like that. Everything I do is pretty much digital, which means that this actually hasn't been a huge shift in a lot of ways.
Excellent. Victoria or Bailey, anything you would like to add there?
Victoria, and I have kind of the same thing as Peyton, of just it takes a little longer, to a lot of spelling and reading. And yeah, so Peyton really covered it for me.
Excellent.
Bailey, yeah, same goes for me as well. I'll definitely, once we progress into the changes in environment, I'll definitely comment a little bit more.
Awesome. So varied perspectives. We've got a number of different barriers, whether it's access to information or communication or the environment, a number of things that this panel experiences in that physical environment. And so panelists, I'm curious, you've kind of briefly talked about some accommodations that you use to negotiate those barriers in the physical space. How has that changed in the digital environment? What's been different about your accommodations? And let's start with Maureen.
Yeah. One, for me, I'm not leaving the house as much, so I'm not having to do a lot of planning around my transportation. If you think about it, we all have to plan in time to commute anywhere we go, whether it be to the grocery store, to school, to and from seeing friends. But sometimes when you have to take public transit or even just the A&M buses, right? I live over by the train tracks, so you always have to plan if there's going to be a train, because you might have a 10-minute delay or you might have a 25-minute delay. It just depends on whether or not there's 100 or more train cars. Um, and some of you might know what I'm talking about. But when it comes to that planning, it's even more so when you can't drive. Am I taking the bus on a weekend and there's reduced hours? Am I going to have to take a transfer bus? Is it a football game weekend and there is no bus, but oh no, I have to go grocery shopping? Can I get a ride share at this time? Or all the ride shares are going to be taken up. Like, should I just ask a friend to take me somewhere? So that's like been way different. I've been mostly just using online services for that a lot. And then when it comes to school, actually, not too much has changed. eCampus is really accessible. Zoom is accessible, and especially with professors being willing to record their lectures, I enjoy it because we touched on this earlier, but looking at PowerPoints for a long time can get very visually exhausting. My eyes get tired. I have something called nystagmus, so like my eyes get shaky after I look at the computer screen for a long time. So having the ability to go back and re-listen to and re-look at those lectures again in that online format has been really, really helpful for me.
Excellent.
I'm Victoria, I can go. So
Excellent.
same thing with the lectures. It's been really nice because all of my classes have been pre-recorded and they're uploaded. So that's been really great. The hardest thing I think for me is I take my tests in the testing center usually when I'm on campus. But now that I'm having to take them like at home, sometimes it's nice, but I do have a family around me. I have a little brother and dogs barking that I'm not used to having around me. So it's kind of making sure that I can make my entire family like be quiet for an hour and a half since I've extended time too, and really being able to focus. And that takes a lot out of you to make sure that you are in a quiet setting and all that. Another thing is I've always been a really big advocate for like myself, and I think that's how we all are in disability resources. And I haven't been able to interact with my professors as much as I'd like to ever. I always try to go to their office hours, and since I know some professors are offering office hours via Zoom, but mine personally aren't. It's all over email, and I think there's only so much that you can say and explain over email. So that's been my hardest struggle, is not being able to communicate with my professors as much as I would like to. But other than that, it's been a pretty great transition. All my professors have been very helpful too.
Great.
Rebecca?
Go ahead, Rebecca.
Just like Maureen said, academically, things haven't changed very much. And the same, I don't have a big problem with the getting around anymore because I'm just in my house. Even when before all this happened, I lived thankfully close enough to campus that I didn't have nearly as much trouble, but it was still a real problem. Now, I think the most difficulty has come in the class I'm TAing for, where the things like the grade book on eCampus is a nightmare with my screen reader. I can't do it. Things like the grader side of Turnitin, I can't do it. So my professor that I'm working with and I have tried to come up with ways of getting around things like that. And before we went online, it was as simple, because I can't just email her the rubrics and things because FERPA. So before spring break, we were putting them on a flash drive, and I would just take the flash drive to her office and piece of cake. Can't do that anymore. So we've been using Google Drive, and Google Drive is screen reader accessible, but it is technically accessible. That doesn't mean it's not clunky and a pain. So I have had to, on the fly, get a lot better with Google Drive, and which is good because I have gotten better with it. Thankfully, the biggest asset right now is I have professors who are understanding that this right now is not ideal. And I have another professor who's willing to stay on Zoom with me after class and go over any questions I have, because it's a digital research class. So we're using a lot of digital tools that aren't always as accessible as they should be, or even if they're accessible, there's still a learning curve. So thankfully, I think the biggest asset has just been professors who are understanding what's happening and working with me to get around those problems.
Maureen.
Yeah, Maureen.
I just want to back off of what Rebecca said, and I'm also a teaching assistant, and I owe a big shout out to the professors and the faculty in the biology department for their assistance in helping me on the instructor end of things. Again, with eCampus, because like Rebecca said, it's a learning curve, not only for students to use, but also from the instructor side of things. So it's really great how the communities come together to make sure that students and faculty are, being able to access the information that we need.
Peyton or Bailey, do you have anything to add here?
Yeah, for sure. This is Bailey. So first off, like, just agree with what they said, is we have amazing faculty and staff that have been very understanding. And so first off, just kind of sympathizing to everyone that this is all new, and for everyone, and everybody is learning a lot, not only about school, but about themselves, and how, about human beings in general, and how we, you know, rely on each other to really grow and to live. And so just wanted to begin with that. But I think the biggest things I've been running into is this kind of routine thing, being a dyslexic thinker. We think in abstracts. There's nuanced thoughts, and so for me, part of my routine was like going to the coffee shops, and it would set me in this like kind of I'd go to a coffee shop, and then I would go to the library, and then I would come home, and it would kind of put me in this, okay, like I got this little break of activity, little brain break, and then I go back to writing a paper because I'm a journalism major, or agricultural communications and journalism. And what I found is that the biggest issue I'm having is this understanding of when assignments are due, and like in what manner we should be handling the assignments. Because when I really rely on verbal communication and being in person, and even when a teacher says something in class, I'll miss it a lot of the times, and I'll go up to them, and I understand better in a conversational environment where there's a back and forth. I'm like, okay, but what about this and this little nuance? Because if I understand the like objective of the assignment, what we're supposed to be learning, instead of just like the things to check off, then I can put out really good work. Because the good work I produce is the things that I really care about. And so I want to actually enjoy what I'm learning, because that's the point of learning. We want to accelerate as a person, and we want to get to a certain place where we're a professional in an area, or a specialist. And for me, that kind of in-person dynamic completely kind of takes a lot of the value out of the class. And so with that being said, I kind of want to transition into how, for me, synchronous class environments going on online, at least, just don't really make sense. Some things I've observed is, especially with the ability on Zoom to not have the video, which I think is a super important feature to have on there. And for the muting thing, it's just, there doesn't seem to be very much dynamic learning going on. It just seems to like go with the paces. Oh, we're going to check in to the class, make sure I get my attendance. And then, and it's kind of just checking the boxes. And I think that's what we've kind of seen in some classes or some school environments. If we're being honest, there hasn't, we've kind of gotten to more of this routinal learning style, kind of based upon this industrial revolution kind of effect that happened back in the day with the bell ringing, and to get us to become factory workers as Americans. And we're far past that. And so I think, you know, what happens with the past is we get these little remnants of how society used to be, and then it applies, and we're kind of don't like change. And so what's happened now with the COVID and you know, this stay-at-home orders and this shutdown of the economy is we're forced to change. And so it's no longer should we change, or if it's working, why don't we just keep going? And now we're seeing that, okay, we're forced into this change. Well, we might as well use this opportunity to actually grow as educators and as students and as the institution in general. And so what I'm kind of, you know, wanting to happen from this is for us to kind of wake up and say, okay, how do we develop new learning styles that are hands-on and that develop actual real skill sets that are applicable to the 21st century? And especially for people with different learning disabilities. And so for me, this synchronous Zoom environment just does not make sense. It just doesn't work. It works for getting a grade, but if we're talking about actually learning something and developing skill sets that will benefit our future and that will make the money we're paying at school worth it, it just doesn't make sense. And so overall, I think that's the kind of more than just like what little things can we change in this online environment. Let's use this time period as leverage to change our lens in which we're seeing education right now.
Yeah, I appreciate your thoughts, Bailey, and I think it's a good segue to asking the question, because things have changed, and because we're thinking outside of the box, we're being creative, we're using the tools and the platforms that we have available to us. What are some things that you would want instructors to know about this time? What's worked, and what could they continue to do that would make your learning experience more accessible? Peyton, would you mind starting?
Yeah, no, of course. So for me, I've used Zoom a lot. I've had the opportunity to use Zoom for more years than we've just started doing it this semester. And so I personally appreciate Zoom, but I appreciate what's behind the Zoom. So the teachers that are actually engaging and working with the students. And I have a TA that he will constantly kind of just like throw out questions that someone has to answer to kind of keep us engaged, because I know a lot of times right now we as students are that motivation, because we're not around our fellow peers in class, we're not around some of our friends anymore, and that motivation to really like be focused in class has kind of been lost, just because of now we're staring at a screen potentially for 4 to 5 hours a day, doing that kind of stuff. And so the biggest thing is with the Zoom, for the teachers to be able to be engaging and not just reading from slides, and that's something that we sometimes see. But I also understand on the professor side that it's very difficult to get students to sometimes participate, and that just becomes a big issue that we face. And so there's definitely different based on different professors and different outcomes is where you're going to get different results. But my biggest thing is that when professors are very much willing to help navigate, like Rebecca said, I think most of us tend to be very proactive and very much advocates for ourselves when it comes to things. And so really paying attention to making sure that they're willing to navigate with us, and while we're trying to understand what's going on and using our accommodations to make sure that we're able to level the playing field amongst other students with the accommodations that we've been able to be used through the Resources Center, and really making sure that we are all really focusing on making sure that all students have the opportunity to do well in this midst of transition, especially since we don't know the future of this transition and how long we're going to be in this transition of time with online classes or not. And so I think another big thing is for getting students engaging. And then some of my other classes don't do Zoom or don't do online class, and they just say, here's a textbook, here's some questions. And I agree with Bailey at that point, is that sometimes that doesn't build our understanding of class at all. It's just an A, B, C, D, here you go. You learn the material, there's a test on it next week. And I was privileged to grow, I went to a high school where we're international baccalaureate teaching. And so I've been able to be used to having the opportunity to really grow and have a deeper understanding of my learning past a textbook. And so while I do believe textbooks are so helpful in having an extra information, a lot of that learning has to come from the professor and from what they're passionate about, because most professors wouldn't be professors if they weren't passionate about what they're teaching. And so I personally feel that having Zoom meetings more regularly, because some of my professors just have once a week, and then you have recorded lectures the rest of the week or something like that. While I do think it's important to have those lectures recorded so that students like us can go back and re-understand if there's something we missed, or set up a Zoom meeting with the professor for I do not understand what happened in class today. It just was not my day, was not able to gather that information or gather that understanding. And having that platform open for students available, similarly to what office hours were. And so if teachers provided that opportunity to have office hours for students to come in on Zoom. One of my professors, every Friday from 12 to 2, he's open, his Zoom is open, and so anybody can join and ask questions, have office hours. If it's something that you need to speak one-on-one with him, you can lock the room or whatever so no one else can come in to the Zoom, and they put it into a waiting room. But I think that's absolutely fantastic to really have that open door policy, because a lot of professors already had that at A&M, and like Victoria said, really making sure that we have that open communication with faculty and staff, and really making sure that open of communication for students with disabilities and students that don't have disabilities, because that's just so important to have that community and having that sense of we're all going through this together.
Excellent. Anybody else have thoughts?
Victoria.
Yeah.
So my only thought is, and my professors have been very great at this, is just kind of keeping us in the loop. I know we're all kind of struggling, as students, but also I would assume that the instructors are also struggling with all of this. And I think right now we're all kind of just, or at least for me, I'm just kind of going through the motions and just trying to get through this semester. Might be just because I'm a senior. But just keeping us in the loop. I check emails all the time now. I've always, but I think just everyone bearing together, and I know everyone else has said that, but just keeping us all in the loop as much as you can, because then we understand also where the professors are coming from as well more.
Great point. Great point.
Maureen.
Yeah, Maureen. And then, hold on, Maureen. Maureen is next, and then I noticed that Rebecca has raised her hand. So we'll go Maureen and then Rebecca.
Sure. So I know as a professor, as a TA, one thing I always appreciate from my students is communication. So just as a instructor side, like, it means a lot when you all communicate with us and let us know what's going on. I've had students that have had internet failures, like getting locked out of accounts, and the ingenuity and the creativity I have seen come out on the other side of this with students submitting assignments and like complying with FERPA has been awesome. They've been amazing. And even when I tell them, like, when it comes to submitting their assignments and making sure that they're accessible so that I can read it, they've been amazing. And then also something I've been trying to do, hold office hours. And then if my students sign into the Zoom room early for their lectures, because I teach invertebrate zoology, which is like a marine biology class, I will find educational videos on YouTube and I will play them for the students until we have lecture. And I'll usually try to find something with like funny content in it, or like funny YouTube videos, just to try to keep things a little lighthearted, a little humorous, because who doesn't need a little bit of laughter every now and again?
Okay, great. Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Great. Sorry about all that. Okay. So I have a few things. One thing I've noticed is that lately I've been getting a lot of notifications from organizations and professors and et cetera about we're going to be doing X activity using Y program. And a lot of times Y program is something I may never even have heard of. So I certainly have no idea whether it's going to be accessible. And, you know, I'm willing to learn how to use new tools, and obviously I have to be able to do that. But after a while, being thrown so many new programs, often at the last minute, can become very discouraging. And I start not wanting to try. So it's like I would have gone to this thing, but I just didn't want to have to worry. I just didn't want to have to think about whether I was going to be able to use the tool. So I think one really productive thing would be to ask your class at large if anyone anticipates having any accessibility issues, because a lot of times I think, at least I feel this way, students are going to feel more comfortable speaking up if they're not the one who always has to bring it up first. Another very specific piece of information, if you're an English professor or some other professor who's going to have your students watch videos or movies, bear in mind that your visually impaired students are not, and this probably applies to hearing impaired students as well, I don't know, but I can see how it could. We don't have anyone except our parents to watch movies with, and so when there's no audio description, I can't watch it by myself. If I were at school, I would be able to get a buddy. At home, I have to watch it with my parents. And if you're assigning hard R-rated movies that I have to watch with my parents, that's not going to work out well. Yeah, so that's just a few specific suggestions.
Those are great. And your point about captioning for the deaf or hard of hearing, I mean, I think that has always been a point. Captioning, transcription, those things are imperative when we are sharing visual and auditory media. And so that still remains in the online space. I will say one thing I have experienced being a program coordinator that's working with making media accessible is seeing assignments change on the fly and having to do some last minute remediation for textbook assignments or articles. And, you know, while this is sort of sprung on all of us last minute, I think it does remind me, and I think it should remind all of us, that when we flip the script and we change the schedule, we need to make sure that all parties who are affected can be in the loop. And so I was thankful for the lead time that we could be proactive and engage with faculty and kind of provide some of that training and professional support. But remembering that, especially when we're using media like video or text or things like that, what is the process for making something accessible if it isn't already, if it doesn't have captions, if it's just a scanned article, things like that. And our office can certainly advocate for that. There's lots of partners that talk about accessibility on campus. And so we've got a pretty vibrant accessibility community. Panelists, thank you so much. I want to jump into some Q&A. Erica, do you have some questions that you could throw out from the chat box?
Yes, I do have a couple of questions here. So one of them has largely been answered. And then there was a question, a follow-up question specifically regarding the information that Bailey had shared. So you had mentioned that having the back and forth conversation is very helpful for you. And the audience member was wondering about courses where the lectures are pre-recorded and the class time is used as a Q&A session via Zoom. Is that helpful? Is that comparable to having that back and forth conversation in this situation?
Yeah, thank you, Erica. I was actually reading these comments here as we were going, and there's some great points brought up there, and I have to say I have to agree with all of them, and it brought a great solution to my mind that I think could even eventually be brought back to the classroom. But if you think about moving a classroom to an online environment, we often think, okay, copy and paste, right? It doesn't seem to work that way usually. But what's kind of mentioned in these comments is if we almost had objectives for the class, like instead of like specific, like definitely there's going to be task work, like especially for a communication and journalism class for developing articles and whatnot. But if we had learning objectives that were the core, the pillar of the class, and then we utilize the Zoom meeting spaces for this Q&A collaborative environment. Yeah. Zoom has really great features called breakout rooms that I know a lot of the professors have been using. And I've actually seen a lot of benefit from that. And so if we actually had recorded lectures, when you look at YouTube, most of the stuff is pre-recorded unless it's like a podcast conversation that's back and forth. So there's that dynamic kind of learning there. But the pre-recorded stuff gives room for the producer, the author, or the professor to create more dynamic learning situations within video. And I know not all professors know really how to do that. And so a basic lecture upload is fine. But using that Zoom classroom for a collaborative, like, okay, how are you working through these problems on your article, or what, how are you attributing this, and breaking up students into these little breakout rooms, and then the professor goes around and bounces to each breakout room and like tends to each student like within this group and can help and do that in a more efficient and effective way. And so I think overall, I'd like to answer these questions, and even this next one here about like giving your students actual task work. We can't meet up in big groups, but we can go outside. We can get into the park, and especially if you're some type of science base, you can go make observations in the real world environment, or even let's say there's a task for a journalist, go to a park and do a story on someone's observation you see. I know there's this guy that he comes and plays the violin at the park by my house all the time, and so I would love the ability to have a task where I go out and I observe someone and then do a personality profile or something like that. So you can do these like outside tasks and then come back in and use the Zoom environment as a collaborative environment. And then she said here, or whoever commented this said, using different forums to where, we kind of think of things in a top-down approach right now, but the new kind of, it's called New Power Model. There's a book on it. Is using these distributed platforms as they were meant to be, as distributed. And so if you can utilize your peer-to-peer learning like models, then that will accelerate the learning environment completely and will ultimately, benefit the amount of learning that actually happens.
I think that's a good point, Bailey, and I appreciate your feedback on this. And I'll just tag on from what I've experienced talking with students over the last couple of weeks is that, this asynchronous classroom environment where you can pause and you can take a break and you can rewind and hit those points that you weren't able to catch the first time. That's wonderful for students who have difficulty focusing, or who do need to take frequent breaks, or do have difficulty processing and need to go take points again so that they can have accurate notes. But when you have a disability and you want to have that strong self-advocacy and communication, having those Q&A sessions could be a good bridge builder, right? So you've got some recorded videos, and then maybe you've got some open Q&A sessions where students can come and collectively learn together and ask questions, because more than likely, if one student has a question, other students have that same question as well. So I don't know, that seems like a great best of both worlds. Do any of the panelists have any thoughts, or any of your instructors doing that now, where you have recorded lectures and then have a Q&A session when lecture normally would be?
Maureen?
Yep.
So my professors aren't currently doing that, but I would like that. And this is because I'm a person who appreciates structure. I have a really difficult time making structure on my own. And part of that is I struggle with depression. So part of me actually having routine was actually like showing up to campus is sometimes like what would get me out of the house each day, or like having to say hello to somebody is like what would get me out of the house in the morning. So having those structured lecture times would really be helpful, even if it was just like getting on the professor's office hours during lecture time and like, all right, I have to watch the lecture and come up with at least one question to ask my professor. Like that for me would help keep me engaged even when things were difficult. But that's just like a personal way of me navigating and maintaining my mental health that may not work for everyone else, but that's a personal preference of mine.
Erica, do you have some other questions that were posed in the chat?
Yeah, so there was a question specifically about using the library databases, which I'm sure a lot of students are having to do now since they don't have physical access to the library. So the question is, are you experiencing any difficulties with trying to access the library databases? And if so, what are those difficulties? Are any of you using the library databases? Let's start there.
So this is Peyton.
Go for it.
So I personally do use the library. I have quite a few classes that require us to do some extra reading on top of the textbook and on top of what goes on in class. And so I actually really love using the library. The online library specifically. I use a lot of it actually before transition happened, just because it was more easier for me to get online access to textbooks or to certain books that were online, and so that I could use an accessibility tool called Read and Write, which allows the book to be read to me, which allows me to have a really better understanding, to not just rely on my own reading. And so I've actually really liked it, and there hasn't really been any change for me on my end for the accessibility when it came to the library resources.
Rebecca?
Good.
If I could just make one more point, I need to duck out after this. But I've noticed a lot of my classmates, a lot of my non-disabled classmates are expressing a lot of frustration with not being able to have access to physical books in the actual library, because I've had multiple professors say you make the best discoveries on accident when you're browsing the bookshelves. And now my classmates are frustrated because they can't do that anymore. And I'm kind of sitting here kind of giggling behind my hand because that's what I have to do all the time. So I think this is an excellent opportunity to really, for all of your students, not just your students with disabilities, really emphasize really making use of various online resources, things like library database, learning to read around your subject, so to speak, like I wrote a paper once about the influence of the planet Saturn on Hamlet, and I used a source about the influence of the planet Saturn on The Last Battle. So it's really an excellent opportunity to, like I said, teach them how to use their resources wisely, how to use resources in ways they wouldn't have thought of, and really to appreciate the resources that exist, and to know that just because the structures that they're not used to using don't exist, doesn't mean there aren't plenty of resources out there to actually accomplish good scholarship, even if it's not the optimal situation. Because like Justin said earlier, if your students with disabilities have questions, odds are that your other students are probably going to have the same questions too. That's what I've got.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, for participating. And I think that kind of segues us into some closing thoughts. Rebecca, feel free to hop off. Thanks again for joining us. Some things I noticed through this conversation were students talking about typical barriers like fatigue and focus, the ability to advocate for themselves and communicate, things that worked, making sure that there was that engagement, pre-recorded lectures so that they could process and take notes in different ways, having instructors that kept that communication line open. Students, panelists, I'm going to have you share just a quick 30-second thought real quick here. I just want to remind our audience, we're grateful for your time. I'm going to send a post-event assessment here either tomorrow or early next week. Please give us your feedback on what you thought of this, and hopefully we can do more of these. Panelists, 30 seconds. What's something that you think is a big takeaway from this time? What's something you hope people walk away with?
Peyton. So for me, I really do think that communication is key. Being willing to listen to your students, disability or non-disability, being willing to listen and take note and making those individual changes that might not seem like a lot to you, but make a huge life difference to us. And so being willing to hop on a Zoom meeting for like 10 minutes, just be like, hey, I don't understand this, or hey, this isn't working for me. How can we change what's going on, and things like that, and making sure that there's that high level of communication, or the ability to have high level communication. Some students won't take it, but others definitely will. And so really making sure that there is that level of communication outside of just an email. Because while we can get a lot done through an email, that one-on-one, hey, how you doing kind of phone call, or even Zoom meeting or something makes a world of a difference to what we need, and so that we think that we're being heard, and not just through a simple email. But I have to log off. I actually have a lab to attend, so thank you all very much for this time, and Justin, feel free to send me any questions that there are.
Anybody else?
Victoria. So I want to go off of Peyton. The communication is really important, but sorry. I think also just bearing with everyone. I know that you're trying to focus on the students, but I think we also understand that the professors are struggling just as much as we are, and just us navigating it together is really important. And I've realized just how much that y'all are trying to help with the students. And I think we all want to thank you for that too, and just being patient with everyone. But that's really what I've taken away, and just thank you all for tuning in, because I know this was we've been going through it, and I hope you all got something out of it. And if you have any questions, please do let us know.
Excellent. Bailey or Maureen, real quick, anything?
Again, what everyone else said, communication is key. Thank you to our fabulous staff and students. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. Disability Resource Center, the Center on Disability and Development. There are so many resources on campus. Please utilize them. Everyone's here to help. And again, just a big thank you to everyone.
Yeah, I want to kind of touch on something Maureen said earlier. She mentioned mental health for a second, and I think just a tip on that, at least for me, is I've felt that too. You know, even being a person of faith, the world can be a lot sometimes, and what I found was what was really bogging me down was this dynamic between due dates and not really understanding when they were and not being able to communicate that. And so I would say just like to help relieve, those, that real issue of mental health is just being like kind of flexible with when things are due and like how stringent that like deadline is, if you really know that the student is really putting their best effort and they're not just trying to avoid turning something in on time. But it's like that just relieving that stress of like, oh, if I don't hit this exact deadline, I'm gonna fail this class, I think has been like something my professors have done for me that has just saved my last few weeks. And so I'm really thankful for that.
Thank you, panelists, for your time. Thank you, audience, for your time. Appreciate you all. Have a great afternoon, and hopefully we can do this again sometime soon. Take care. Bye-bye.